Willis Harman, this is the Institute of Noetic Science in Sausalito near San Francisco. Willis Harman, what are you?
What am I? I'm president of this organization. We're a membership organization, about 50,000 people, so we have a staff of about 30.
But what does this organization do? Noetic Science. What is Noetic Science?
The word noetic has to do, roughly speaking, with the deep intuition, with intuitive knowing. When you know something noetically, you know it's true, but you don't know how you know it. And essentially, we're involved with research and education relating to the human mind and getting the topic of consciousness with all of its various ramifications included within Western science, which it has not been.
And with Western science, you mean things like computers and technology?
Well, all of modern science. We do not have a good way of handling subjective experience, and as a matter of fact, modern science does not take into account consciousness as a causal factor. That is, you decide to do something and some action follows.
Yeah.
But in science, we try to explain that away as though consciousness were not causal, but we try to explain consciousness in terms of something that happened in the brain and so on. That's totally contrary to your experience. Your experience is that your own intentionality causes things to happen.
I want something, I will something.
Yes, exactly.
Then my hands or my mouth, or I do something, I write a letter, I sign a bill, and then it happens in reality.
Yeah. So there's a conflict between the scientific worldview and the experience of the total human race. We all act as though we thought what goes on in our minds can cause things to happen.
Okay. Noetic science, does it have anything to do with like noosphere and stuff like Teilhard de Chardin was talking about?
In a way, the root Greek word is the same word, nous. But noetic science is, essentially it's just it's whatever we choose to look into, just like physics is whatever physicists look into. So we've spent a lot of time over the years, we're 23 years old, a lot of emphasis has been on the role of the mind in healing, the interaction between what goes on in the mind and what happens with the body's immune system, psychoneuroimmunology, and such phenomena as remote prayer healing. Something happens in the mind of one person who may believe that he or she is praying for an individual to get better. And
some people would say this is very vague. This is, as you say, it's not science. It's faith. It's belief.
Well, but if you get measurements, that is, if you do, for example, one project is, and this is a project we're helping to fund in Israel, where you have the same operation performed on a great number of people, and without their knowing it, a fraction of the group are prayed for by somebody and another fraction are not. And nobody knows, which one is which. But nevertheless, it turns out after you sort out the data that those who were prayed for somehow healed more rapidly, without complications and so on. So then it becomes scientific data. We may not understand it very well. It's pretty mysterious, but nevertheless the data is obtained in the usual scientific way.
So this is similar to what Rupert Sheldrake does with his 7 experiments that changed the world. He is looking into animals, and if you look at people, whether they know they're being observed, he's in fact trying to prove that the laws of physics as we know them are not true.
Well, it's not that they're not true, it's just that they're not complete. That is, if you set up situations in which consciousness is somehow ruled out as a factor, well then of course the laws of physics hold. But there are other phenomena in our experience that don't seem explainable in terms of the laws of physics. Now, as you well know, the world is divided into 2 bodies of thought here. There are those who have the faith that ultimately, through quantum physics and chaos theory, we'll ultimately have explanations for all of those phenomena, and consciousness will be explained away. And then the other position is consciousness is part of reality, and it needs to be brought in as a causal factor, not explained away.
To the extreme, some scientists believe that consciousness is the root of reality.
Yes, although it's a very small minority, but that's a position that's been around for thousands of years. I think perhaps to state it most clearly, the mainstream position is that consciousness is something that evolved after billions of years of evolution of the solar system. The other position is consciousness was there all the time, and the material world evolved, but never out of touch with consciousness.
Okay, now science these days is, we had quantum physics and now we have things like non-locality theories and the Bell theorem, where basically they say the observer plays a very important role in that what's being observed, and in fact defines what is being observed by looking at it.
That's right, so that we have discovered a basic contradiction in Western science, that we assumed that everything could be explained in terms of quantifiable scientific laws, and then we find that the consciousness of the observer can't be ignored, and that is not definable by those kinds of laws. Now, of course, the mainstream faith still is that someday we'll learn how to measure it, but it's now quite respectable, even though it's a minority opinion, to say we now have to go back and re-examine the metaphysical assumptions that lie under Western science. See, when I studied science, or most scientists studied science, nobody ever told us that the whole enterprise is based on some assumptions which are not scientific, they're metaphysical.
And one of them is that there's a causal thing between things that happen. Causality is the basis of Western science, which means that the one leads to another.
Exactly.
That if I do something, it leads to another thing and another thing. And what you're saying is that that those assumptions might not be true. And in fact, what you're saying is that there is evidence being gathered that it is not true, that things happen for other reasons and without being caused by, say, logical things.
It's not that it's not true. It's simply that there are some other factors that have been neglected, and that now we have to take them into account because we're recognizing that contradictions have appeared.
Now, take a practical thing. What I always wondered is like football games between nations. Yes? Does that have any relevance in this? Yeah.
Yes, of course it does. Football teams, at least in this country, in the United States, football teams are trained, for example, to use the power of affirmation, the power of positive thinking, as it's sometimes called. They are taught that psychological factors have a profound effect on the game. And the more you look into this sort of thing, the more clear it is that those effects cannot really be explained away neatly by known scientific laws. There's something mysterious that's left out. And there are just many, many examples of this. And until fairly recently, the persuasive power of science was so great because of its accomplishments that we assumed that everything that was left out that seemed mysterious would in principle ultimately be explainable by the kinds of scientific laws that we have. Now we're finding that that just doesn't seem to be true. We just have to be a little more humble about our science, that's all.
Just what I would like you to do is sometimes look at that camera.
Oh.
That's one of the things that and in fact, we should maybe, okay, I should not bump the table all the time, because it makes it more vivid.
Yes,
you understand?
yeah.
It's like you talk to me. Can you make a little, okay, coming back. This institute is concerned not only with science and proving that there is more than science, but it actually organizes things in the world.
You mean things like conferences, events? Yes, by all means. For example, we had a recent conference in Cambridge, England, where we gathered together scientists from different countries and philosophers to deal with the question, do we really need a new epistemology in science? Epistemology is how you answer the question, how do you know? And the typical scientist's position would be, well, we already settled that question. We know what scientific method is. Now it's becoming a live question again. For example, in April of 1996, there's a major conference in Tucson, Arizona, it's entitled Toward a Science of Consciousness. And most of it will be papers where scientists are trying to explain how if you look deeply into the cell or deeply into the brain or deeply somewhere, and you use things like chaos theory and quantum physics, somehow, somewhere in there, we'll find the origin of consciousness. We'll find the physiological explanation. A little bit of the conference will be on the question, are we ever really going to get there that way, or do we really need a new approach, a new epistemology, a new paradigm, if you would?
Okay. Now, people are talking about the religion, the faith, the spirituality, even the science of the next century. How is this going to influence thinking in the next century?
Well, I think if you observe what's happening in the culture, people are turning more and more. People are recognizing we have neglected a spiritual dimension in our lives, and that we've been encouraged to do that by a materialistic culture. And so there's quite a significant movement in both Northern Europe and the United States and elsewhere in the world to do something about that. And partly that puts a pressure on science to, especially among younger scientists, to ask this question about consciousness, which ultimately becomes a question about spirit. But also, there's a certain tendency within just ordinary people to say, well, if we can't learn about that through science, maybe science doesn't tell us all we need to know about the nature of reality. So there's a certain disenchantment with the completeness of science now, I think. It's not anti-scientific, at least we don't.
Does this mean a return of religion, a return of faith?
There's enough. Those are different questions. I don't have any idea whether it means a return of religion in terms of religious institutions. I think definitely it means a return, at least all the indications are, a strong, an accelerating return to the question of spirit and to the power of what you might call faith or affirmation or.
Now, in the States, over the past 10 years, we've seen movements like Course in Miracles. We have the what's this book called?
Well, there's the Seth materials. There are many of them.
Celestian prophecies.
Celestine prophecy, exactly.
Yeah, and those have found quite a response.
The Celestine prophecy, particularly, is just an amazing response, and mainly what that says is that there's a hunger that if it may not even be completely satisfied by that particular book, but there's a hunger there that reflects itself in those book sales, and it also reflects itself in some very recent survey data, but. And we're talking now about tens of millions of people in this country and tens of millions of people in Northern Europe. It's a minority, but it's not a negligible minority.
I have a feeling that some of these movements really turn this non-quantifiable, non-causal thing into an extension of the ego again. Like, let me give an example. People use visualization, imagination, things that we used to call prayer or whatever, to become rich or, I don't know, do all kinds of material things.
I think that's quite right. I think I've watched this in many, many people. It seems to be a kind of two-stage process. First, you learn about the power of affirmation, and you say, look, I can have all kinds of things in my life just by affirming that they're already there, and the process seems to work.
Yes, sure. What affirmation means, you like repeat or you create images?
It's like self-hypnosis in a way. You may do it with images or you may do it with verbal statements, but essentially you're hypnotizing yourself, or you're changing the contents of the unconscious beliefs. And even though your logic would say this can't possibly have any effect in the world out there, nevertheless, experience seems to indicate that maybe it does.
So there's two stages
sometimes.
People go to.
So that first stage, it's very tempting. But there comes a point where you say, look, who is it that's doing the choosing about what's good for me? It's the ego mind. And so if this power really works, and if the universe is really not, if reality is really not the way they taught me in school, but something quite different, then who am I to be making these choices? What I should do then in that case is turn my life over to this higher part of the mind that seems to know not only to get how to get what I want, but knows what I want.
So this is the jump from the magic to the mystical.
All right, that's a concise way to put it, yes. I think that's a good one.
Now, things like the internet, there's a global mind forming, some people call it. What will this mean for the next century in relation to this trend to go towards the spiritual, or at least the mind matter thing?
Well, let's be realistic about this. This complex society dominated by a global economy is not going to go smoothly into some new kind of spiritual belief system with everything else remaining in place. Absolutely everything's in flux because the picture of the basic nature of reality is shifting from one thing to another, just as it shifted at the end of the Middle Ages, and we went from one kind of society to another one that's totally different. And we're in the process of doing that again, except about 10 times as fast, so that it's very disconcerting to people because you see, and we will see increasingly, institutional breakdowns that are mysterious. They're not easily explainable. The whole system's in the process of breaking down, but at the same time reconstructing itself. That is, if you look with other eyes in slightly different directions, you can see all sorts of examples of people getting together in new kinds of communities, new kinds of organizations, creating new pieces of a new society with very different value emphasis.
Do you think the net, like the internet, plays a role in that at the moment?
Oh, of course, worldwide communication plays an extremely important role because it means that everything speeds up. If something is happening in one part of the world, it's instantly known everywhere. And so that's part of the acceleration is due to the communication. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I see, and we have a cyberspace mystery school looking into this, is like that I predict that within short we will have methods on the internet where people can train their visualization, imaginative powers. So the affirmations that we now read from books or tapes, we will actually draw from the internet and similar media. Do you see that same trend?
I think that's probably true. I'm not sure how much a difference it makes whether you get it from books or tapes or media or personal contact. And probably we'll get it from all of them. But certainly the internet is going to make it much better known, much more widely known, and much more rapidly. Any new information will just spread around instantaneously.
Yeah. There are also phenomena like we used to have automatic writing and stuff like that, and there are now phenomena what they call electronic spirits or whatever. Have you heard about it?
Oh, I've definitely heard about it. We've been tracking it for 10 or 15 years. You could call it, if you allow yourself to believe in such things, what seems to be, or what purports to be, electronic communication with the dead. Electronic communication one way and telepathic communication in the other direction. Now,
we're talking about messages that ghostly pop up on the internet, or picture files that seem to indicate something?
Those are some of the forms, but if you get in on the inner circles of some of this, you'll find that it seems to be.
Okay, we were talking about the electronic. How would you call this?
How would you call it? Well, of course, the term that they seem to prefer, the investigators that I've been in touch with, is instrumental transcommunication, ITC. But certainly, the meaning of that would communicate most directly to people if you simply said what seems to be electronic communication with the dead.
But that's only one form. Another form that I noticed is, like we have with the telephone, you know when someone is going to call you.
Oh, well, now that's another thing. That's been happening, that's a much older phenomenon.
Yeah, but it's now happening with electronic mail.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, now, there are two things involved. I see what you're saying about electronic mail, that a message may be there that's from some person who's alive on the earth, but that person did not file the message. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that sometimes I think about a person, and then I look into my electronic mail, and guess what?
Oh, all right.
There is the
So there's enough connectedness so that when a message has been sent, you are somehow aware of it.
yes, and we are. One of the things I'm interested in is if you send the same message like a million times in a certain pattern all over the world, would it then get better or would it be heard better? In other words, if we make a peace message and send it around the world enough times, would it make any difference?
Oh, I think it probably would. But that statement would have to be based on an emerging picture of the nature of reality, which is different from the one we're all taught.
Yeah, so we might be talking about things like electronic prayer.
We might be. I have not used that phrase before, but yes, we might be.
Well, the Dalai Lama still runs around with a little thing where he turns around his prayer wheel, and so why not have an electronic prayer wheel?
I'll have to confess that I don't. That's not where a major part of my efforts is going to go. But yes, it might be something for the future.
Okay. Another thing you do is actually you believe that small companies, entrepreneurs, they make a difference in the world.
Well, it seems to me, and it seems to a lot of the people that I work with in the business world, that business is now the dominant institution on the planet. And if this change is in fact taking place, if we're already in this fundamental transition, the central institution in there is going to be business, for better or worse, just because of its central position. And so a number of such people created an organization called the World Business Academy, which is a network of people who are concerned with the future role of business on the planet. And there are other such groupings in Europe and elsewhere. What you find, I think, when you look at business is that the large corporations tend to become bureaucracies. They tend to be relatively rigid, and they probably are not going to be leading this cultural transformation. But small entrepreneurs, on the other hand, especially women entrepreneurs, you'll find some of the most interesting experiments going on now in small business like that. So I think it is an extremely important factor. You know, we've always tended to think of small businesses and nonprofit organizations as being rather insignificant compared to the global economy. But when you're in a time of radical change like this, those are precisely the places where the change tends to occur first.
Do you think that business people or entrepreneurs have a better grip on, say, the magical part of this? Of existence?
They don't talk about it very much, but you'd be surprised when you get in a confidential mood how many people do depend on intuition in some rather spooky ways. And that may be an Americanism, some rather mysterious ways. And
could it be that by definition these people have developed their willpower over reality better than, say, a bureaucratic civil servant?
It may be that, and also people with a keen intuition tend to go into business more. They are imaginative. They tend to be entrepreneurs. And also, people in business have learned to respond to the cultural environment very rapidly. If things change out there, they have to respond to that change or their business will suffer. So there are years and years of practice of watching the environment and responding to it promptly.
Yeah, some people say that the companies best suited for the next century are actually those who are the most chaotic and can handle the most flexible situations.
I think that's quite right. One of the people we work with is the founder of the Visa credit card organization, Visa International, and a man named Dee Hock. And he's going around the world giving talks all over about what he calls a chaotic organization. It kind of combines chaos with order. It's creative chaos. And his main point is that in these times, that's exactly the kind of organization that we need. Partly because it can be more responsive, partly because people are better and better educated, they have more information available, and more they want to be in control of their own destiny. And so they want to be entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs within the organization. So strangely enough, the direction of organizational structure, I think, is not toward better, more tightly ordered forms, but toward more creative chaos.
Now, education, schools. These days we tend to give people computers, kids computers, and everything goes in the computer, and you put them in front of a machine when they're 4 years old. And do you think that works out?
Well, education by computer and television really doesn't look terribly promising. But we get the education we deserve. I mean, in this country particularly, the community has a great deal to say about what kind of schools are there. And so in any community, whether it's urban or rural, you'll get the schools that the community will support.
Like the politicians.
So we get what we deserve. Now, but the educational system, no matter where it is, whether it's European countries where it's significantly different, or the United States, the educational system is not going to be out in the lead. Education, by definition, is a conservative activity.
So you say it's not promising. Television, computer education is not promising. Why not?
Well, in the form in which we have it. Now, that doesn't mean that the tools don't have that potentiality. But when television is primarily driven by advertising and the computers are primarily used for entertainment in the educational situation, real education is probably not very effectively transmitted in those ways.
Yeah. Do you think that it plays a role that, say, computers are very linear machines, that they train you to be very logical, while what you say, in fact, is that there might be underlying things that are not very logical, that business and entrepreneurship, it might not be logical, but a more intuitive thing?
Well, real education is a very, very subtle matter. We educate one another even as we sit here and talk with each other. Education depends on, real education depends on very human qualities like rapport between the person, the learner who's called a teacher, and the learner who's called a student. And we're trying to substitute, in the name of economic efficiency, we're trying to substitute machines for real human interaction, and it will never really work. Now, that doesn't mean that computers don't have their purposes and that you can't convey certain kinds of information by video clips and so on, of course. But we can't leave the human element out of a fundamentally human activity.
Okay. This was Willis Harman at the Noetic Institute of Noetic Science in Sausalito, beautiful Sausalito, even in this, what is it, January, over the bay. And so the main message is there is more than what the eye meets.